Hello, my name's Junior 500. I'm Jacob J. Books Corner. And normally, we are kind of like in a book corner-ish things. Ignore Taylor Swift on my shirt. We're going to talk about Katabasis today by R.F. Kwong. I'll get the dust cover eventually. We'll get a book. We'll get a thumbnail for it. Katabasis. This is going to be a spoiler-y and non-spoiler review. Before we jump into this review, however, there will be chapter titles linked down below in case you want to jump directly into the non-spoiler review, or if you just want to jump into my spoiler-y thoughts. I do want to quickly announce I did write a book. That book is called Gunshot Residue. It follows Alex as he believes his husband is cheating on him, and he realizes that some secrets deserve to stay buried. This is a romance suspense trilogy. This is book 1 of 3. They're adult spicy romances. In case you want to read it, links are down below. That being said, Katabasis itself, I'm gonna bring in Jacob from a different time, from a time he's finished this book, to tell you a little bit better non-spoilery thoughts than I can 90 pages in. So we'll go ahead and jump to that, Jacob, instead, because I find that I have a much more clear answer of what the actual book's about, and I think you should learn before you read it. So let's go ahead and jump over to him. Let's go ahead and do a quick non-spoiler review for Katabasis by R.F. Kwong. This is gonna be real short. Katabasis follows 2 grad students as they travel to hell and travel the 7 layers of hell to find their professor for a recommendation letter for the next step in their educational process. These 2 characters have a lot of history, and we're diving deeply into that history while also discovering what hell means. In a lot of ways, this book feels more like a thesis on Dante's Inferno than it does a story itself. However, I will digress, and we'll go ahead and jump into the spoilery section. If this sounds interesting to you, I would recommend it. I'd recommend the try. If it does not sound interesting to you whatsoever, I would just skip. Alright, let's go ahead and jump into spoilers. Now, when I started reading Katabasis, this is not broken up into parts, they're broken up into chapters, so we're just going to try to do it every 25-ish%. This is 13% into it. I'm just reading it. I'm about to read it when I'm going to go on this drive and stuff, and I just wanted you guys to know where I'm at with the story. When I started reading Katabasis, I wasn't really sure what it was. I know it was historical fiction, and I knew it was like adult. However, I didn't know if it was supernatural. I didn't know if it was a horror novel or a thriller. I wasn't really sure what it's classified as. I know it's set in a magical world. Cambridge itself is being born with magicians. It is set in a time where technology is coming around, and so like we have light bulbs and stuff, which is really interesting. You think if they're magicians, they can just conjure up light. However, that doesn't seem to be the case. Our main character, Alice, is a magician, and she's trying really hard to be a magician. However, they are in a point in time where magician jobs and roles in life are dying out. I'm gonna have to pay a little bit more close attention. I'm sure there's like some really particular details about that in relation to something else that was going on at the time that I'm probably just not aware of. But the other character who came on this journey with them, I think his name, I want to make sure that I get the name right. This is such beautiful font. Anybody knows what this font is, please tell me. It's so gorgeous. Peter, with 1 T, which is really disturbing to me, is also a university student. However, Peter with 1 T is someone who's there for more of protection of her, more will for her. The first 80 pages, we follow these 2 characters. We get to learn a little bit about them, their history. She is a workaholic, one could say. She is a person who is hunting and striving for the perfect grade. She's always been that way. There's something we learned very early on. Peter's past is pretty guarded right now, so we'll learn more. We do know that they were in a somewhat connected, committed relationship, sexually or something or those lines. Prior to these events, they were aware of one another, and then they weren't, and now they are again. They both decide to go because he knows other things about hell that she couldn't figure out. And so this is also a world where hell is extremely documented. They have maps, they have philosophies to go off of, they have different things, and so they feel extremely very well prepared. This hell is very different from Hellbent. Which is the only other thing I can compare it to in my head. I'm carrying between Hellbent and Nico D'Angelo. So you understand my point here? These are vastly 2 different projects over this one. You would think it'd be more on the lines of this, but it's not. The hell they get dropped into very early on, I was really shocked. I thought it was going to happen probably 25% into the book. It happened within the first 10 pages. How they get dropped into is one of souls. It's the limbo period of times where they go, and they end up having to cross this bridge of souls, and they talk, and they realize that their professor that they're hunting down, who did die, I guess a brutal death, was sent to hell and he is there, and he's running the place as if he's fucking Satan, which I find hilarious. He seems like an asshole. I'm not really got to actually meet him in character, but in passing, he seems like a horrible dude. Essentially, they're there for like a recommendation letter because I guess this professor is known to being harsh and horrible. We know that he's maimed and murdered, at least. We also know that there's are cases of possible SA going on or sexual misconduct in the workplace and with the students. We don't really know what those are, but there are mentions of it. So there's a lot of reasons. Like when they talk about hold on, I can show you all the levels of hell here. When they talk about which level of hell that they need to go to, she decides by the end that they should go to the mall because he could find a place in any of them. However, this recommendation letter is gonna get you far. And I wonder if the conclusion of all this is the fact that you learn the lesson that some people don't deserve to be brought back from hell. I don't know. Come on, girl. It's an interesting concept and it's an interesting story. Hell itself is very vastly interesting. We have these creatures called shades, which are basically your souls after you die. Some of them feel translucent, some of them have power. It feels like it feels icy cold to touch. They are human, and something else that they realize immediately, or not really immediately, but something else they realize is that if they die in hell, they're probably dead forever, which was not something either of them were expecting. They were expecting to be able to cross into hell and be fine, which is fucking crazy. Like, what the fuck? They also didn't realize that it was going to be a time loop, which I'm like, any time you've ever talked about hell, we all know it's a time loop. Like, yeah, I mean, Dante's Inferno's version of hell isn't always necessarily the version that everybody goes with when describing it. However, most people say it's a time loop. You start in one area, you end back up in the area, and you have to cross through all hell to be able to get out to the other side. There's always like a portal or a loophole at the end. You know what I mean? If you're trying to escape from it. I've read enough books trying to escape from hell. That was a shocking realization. They climb a lava full of dead bones and bodies, get to the top, sleep. They have a little encounter with a boner, and then they realize that they are now back in Cambridge because that's the hell thought they would deserve, which I find funny. I can't really tell if I like the writing too much. It doesn't feel as I don't know, there's sections of it. Let me talk about the sections real fast, because the story itself, the characters are a little I need a little bit more depth to them before I can really talk about them. However, this section's like the last one we just read is on reincarnation. The whole thing is italicized. It feels directly quoted from textual knowledge, which is really interesting, and I'm wondering what it's building up to. This is like the third or fourth one we've received. There's nothing else to describe except for the fact it's beautifully written. Oh my god. That's where we're at in katabasis. I'll come back in with another update probably tonight with more spoiler release. Hello, welcome back. I want to give an update. So, katabasis I read until 75% in. My marker hasn't moved, but it's more towards this way. That's all you really need to know. In my opinion, chapter 20 through 22 is a point in the novel, now it's pretty deep in the novel, 60% in, where the reveals start to happen, and you kind of get an understanding what's going on here. You kind of figure out if it's for you or not for you. You get two big reveals. Two really huge reveals. The first reveal is why Alice is on this journey. The second reveal is who the second protagonist is, the other voice that's being told throughout the story. And I do wonder if you don't listen to it on audio, as I am sometimes reading it physically, sometimes I just listen to it on audio. I have things I have to do. And there's another voice that comes in. It's very distinct. It's a male voice. And in this book, or in the section that I read, sections I read today, that voice finally had a name put to it. And so that's also something else. The thing here is this is a rivals to lovers romance, which was not something I was expecting. Technically, it was friends to rivals to lovers, is the perspective that it goes in. We officially have backstories. Chapter 20 is Alice's backstory. Chapter 21 is Peter's backstory. Alex, in my opinion, had a much better backstory. It went on for a little too long for my liking. Chapter 20 was a very long-dated chapter. It starts on page 300, and I would not be surprised if it goes on for 24 pages. That felt like hours when I was reading it, because it just kept going and going. I felt extremely bad for this girl. And like I said, Peter's story happens relatively soon after that. Chapter 22, they have a little intermission. And then we get chapter 22, which is Peter's story. And like I said, it goes on. Essentially, we get nothing but background for 60 pages. Okay? Let's talk about it. What do we learn? We learn that Peter is the second POV that's coming in here and we're adding notes about chalk and a few other things, a few other tidbits. And we'll talk about the writing, and we'll talk about how I feel about R.F. Kuang, and if I agree with some of the criticisms that I had seen about the book. We'll talk about those things as well here. And there's a lot of other stuff going on here. We have other characters that they're interacting with. We have a whole section of betrayal that we're talking about as well that I will only like briefly mention. So essentially there's this other girl which I talked about. They tried to get rid of her and she came back and then they tried to get rid of her again and it did not work and they got kicked off. Okay. And it was a whole problem. It was a whole thing. And then they have this like heart-to-heart conversation. They realize that they're alone and they don't know what they're doing and they can't figure it out. And so she really wants to die and she really wants to go back, one or the other. He wants to push forward and find a loophole to get out of hell. He doesn't believe if they go back, they'll find an exit. And so he does believe you have to continue forward. By the end of this conversation, by the end of 60 pages, you have their full wants and needs presented to you in very bright details. And on top of that, very important in my opinion, you also have the main conflict. Because I'm not gonna lie to you, because the romance does not work for me, and it has not worked for me from the very beginning. It's kind of working for me a little bit more now. In my opinion, you need to convince me over before 300 pages for a 600-page book. I need to be convinced really early on, and it was not. I was not convinced. Alex does not seem like someone who would be in any type of like relationships. Like there's not enough conflict. There's not enough, and the romance, in my opinion, does not move the story along. It does not progress anything. Them going through hell is interesting. However, there's these long tidbits of work. So essentially, Ara Kwong takes the idea that things like Dante's Inferno and a few other philosophers at the time all decided they went to hell, and they all put these pieces out, and it's really well documented. You know exactly what I'm talking about. And she took it and she built a world around it as if it was the actual truth. And so a lot of people think it's kind of posh, and a lot of people think it's kind of like she's rubbing into her face that she can read all these things. For interesting, I've also heard because I read Yellowface. I read Poppy War. I've never read Babel. In Babel, for instance, a lot of people talk about how the prose are so extreme that it's hard to digest. This is almost too plain that I find it annoyingly easy to digest. So it's a mixed bag for me, and you can kind of see the problem here is that the story itself is so plain, and then you have parts of the you have Peter's part of the story, okay? Which is really interesting to me, especially because she's talking about femininity and she's talking about feminists and the movement and stuff also throughout here. His parts are almost reading like an academic paper up until this point in the story, and then almost all that gets drained away. I'm not complaining, those sections didn't really work for me. However, you could see how talented of an author or of a writer she is with her prose. In those sections in particular, there's a few lines here or there that I think work. A lot of it, in my opinion, does not. What are the big things? What is the part of the book where I was like, maybe it's a soft DNF? You know what I mean? I'm gonna finish it for you, but if I wasn't doing this, I don't know. It's a rape revenge story, and I didn't really expect it. I think I kind of expected it, but I didn't expect it. So both these characters believe they have killed him, for one reason or the other, and we'll get into both. They both have solid points for those reasonings. So essentially, she is the reason why the experiment that killed him is wrong. She blames herself because she doesn't believe that it could even possibly be a thing because she's a human computer. He purposely wrote a bad experiment that he knew the person was going to publish. However, this whole conversation, he's hated him. Peter's hated Grimes the entire time, and Alice adores him. And they have this conversation about being pitted up against one another. And she says, well, I'm going to tell you my story. And my story was he sexually assaulted me. And it's in the book, it's in details and stuff, and essentially he did this thing, and she didn't want anything about it. She wanted no passes for it. He still continued to do this thing, and then essentially it gets caught. They get caught in the act of doing this thing, and so he backs off because someone caught her saying no. Not that I think it holds a lot of merit for where she's at and what she's talking about and what they're doing. And the whole thing feels a little off based on some of the other conversations because they're not really big conversations through the first half of the book. And so it almost feels a little out of left field. This section of this being the angle that R.F. Kuang has gone with hasn't really well paced out throughout the whole book. To the point where it doesn't feel like a plot twist. It feels like a natural development of the story. However, the storylines going around it in her time at Cambridge when this was going on does not feel very organic. It almost feels like the exact opposite, which could be the effect that Ara Kwong went. I don't know. I understand the conversation she was trying to have here, but I don't know if it fully worked. I don't think it fully worked. And so essentially that's her big thing. Okay, and so she thinks she purposely messed up on this experiment, which got him killed, sent to hell, and so she wants to bring him back. However, she has no intentions of bringing him back for a letter of recommendation or whatever bullshit answer she told him at the very beginning of the story. She wants to bring him back kind of like as a meat puppet, in a way, make him be in agonizing pain for the rest of his life. Like, she never wanted to trade a soul for a soul. She just wanted to take back the version that they would give him and then trap him away in a closet somewhere and do experiments on him for the rest of his life as somewhat of a revenge plan, in my opinion. It felt very revengey. Okay, take your word however you feel. That's her story. Okay, now Peter's story on the opposite hand is that he is born with Crohn's disease. Essentially, it's somewhat very similar to irritable bowel syndrome. It's very vastly different because it's much harder on the body, to the point where just a few years ago they were cutting out Crohn's disease, is what it is. Just a few years ago they were cutting out, you couldn't go to the bathroom normally. You had to do it through a bag. Like, there's other ways they've worked it out, but at this point in time, in the story, he has been dealing with this his entire life, and it's been very isolating. And so he gets to college, and she talks about it through their relationship, through their perspectives and stuff, and finally get an answer on this perspective, that she felt very left behind from him. She felt very close to him immediately, and then he felt very distant and like the whole 9 yards, right? And this was because he had to go away because he got super sick. And so we're learning all this information. When he goes and he tells Professor Grimes that he's like super sick, and Professor Grimes is like, dude, it's really nothing. You can do better. Have better excuses next time. As he's had like thousands of doctor's notes in front of him saying these are the reasons why, the guy didn't care. And he went on to publish a very big deal inside the world of magic, something that Peter had discovered and made himself, and he put his name on it. And so Peter purposely messes up an experiment, the same experiment that she purposely didn't recorrect, to have him dead. And so they get to a point where they trust each other very thoroughly by this point, right? However, she's done with life, and he is trying to find a loophole and escape. They're no longer hunting for this professor. They don't care about it anymore. They just don't want to die in hell and have their souls be here damned for eternal, even though eventually they do strongly believe this is where they're going to end up for the consequences of their actions that they've already done, that we've already detailed. And so like it's almost like a cycle, okay? Which could be a conversation in itself as well. I stopped relatively soon after that. That's around the 75% mark, is that he found a root, an equation. I'm assuming it's that thingy, right? I'm assuming it's that thing right there. He found an equation, however, this equation only equated to, oh my god, I take that back. We have more information. Equated to only one person. And she said, this is an obvious mistake. We can figure it out. And he said, there's not enough power between the both of us. We need too much blood to make this work, this magical system work. Only one person can go back. One person has to die. He chose her because he's in love with her. And a self-sacrifice moment. I don't know if he's actually dead or not. I've not read that far enough ahead to know. And then my brain got really distracted by the end of the night, as it does, because it's 4 o'clock in the morning. That's where we're at with katabasis. Is he dead? Is he not? I don't know. And then we just went backwards in time again. I think I'm currently backwards in time. I think we are officially back up into present day, of talking about other stuff that was going on around that same time between her and Peter to really figure out this bond. I really don't like the structure of this book. I don't like the pacing of it. I have a lot of issues with it, to the point where it was originally a 4 and now it's looking like a 3.5. The further we go, the less I like it, which is really sad. I really think it's gorgeous. It's very pretty. I like R.F. Kuang's writing so much though. I don't think this is her best writing I've ever read. I think the story is very immersive. However, I'm thinking like maybe it should have been novella, or just not nearly as long, because I just feel like we're retreading the same material over and over again and getting patches of new work. And then also like the parts that are like super info dumpy, where it's all about world building and trying to understand why this is working and how they even got to hell and all this other stuff, feels almost, like I said, like an academic paper. And so it's almost too hard to digest with the very minimalist prose that come with the actual story. I don't know. I hope it makes sense. I hope my opinion of it makes sense. That is where we're at. I'm just going to come in here and tell you the update for katabasis. I will finish it today. I'm going to continue reading it on the car ride down to see my sister. I don't really know how much longer I have of it, but it can't be longer than an hour is my best guess. I don't like it. Pierre did die. Alice is on this journey on her own. She ends up making it, by the way, to the 8th core. The 8th core has a world called Deasis in it, which I guess in certain accounts of hell it's mentioned or whatever. And she ends up in a world called Citadel, which is the more important part here. So Deasis is where you're writing a term paper over and over again, and it's like hell. And Citadel is supposed to be like this peaceful calm, but she's realizing that it's actually a bunch of these shade figures that are not. And so she's exploring this city is what she's doing currently. And that's where I'm at. That's all I have to update you on. Other stuff is going on. I just don't really give a fuck. And so I'm trying to keep my brain in the story so I have things. But I can definitely tell you that I was much more intrigued in the, like, where my marker is here. I think killing off Peter was a bad idea. I kind of see where she was coming from. Also, I do believe she has found Grimes. if I remember correctly. I'll come back in here tomorrow with a final update. It's gonna be like a 2.5. It's just, it is what it is. I might give it a 3. I don't know. Because I feel bad giving it like a 2 because I don't want to be like, oh, I'm a hater, katabasis, blah, blah, blah. I just didn't really care for the, like, I didn't read Babel, so I don't know how pretentious Babel is. And I've heard some mixed things, but a lot of people with Babel in particular were talking, it's all white people pissed. I'm not mad because of like anything. I'm just bored. I'm just not having a fun time. Like, I'm sure if you're like someone who is actively a literary student who is enjoying and your like thesis is on something like this, oh my god, this could be amazing for you. That girl is not me. I mean, it's literal hell, except it's hell that I'm having to read. And like, I've read other hells before and had a great fucking time, so I was really excited for this. That's all I got. Let's go ahead and wrap up Katabasis by R.F. Kuang. Was a 2.75 for me personally for its final act. So essentially I read it in 2 sections, the final act. The first section was dedicated to like the last hour or so, and then the first section was dedicated to the last like 2 hours, the last section was dedicated to the last hour. Mostly all you really need to know is she found a place called the Citadel. She ended up fighting the big bads, killing them as well by doing the same thing she had planned on doing to Professor Grimes by trapping them, and then she ends up back with the person who saved them, the girl that I didn't really mention because I didn't really find her to be that important. Her idea is very important to the story, but I just didn't find it to be that important in my opinion. And then we circled on out to, so we have all this, right? She ends up making her way to the actual creator of Hell. He's not called Satan here, he's called, I can't remember, it's from a book. He's the creator, and she begs and she begs and she says, you know, I don't, like, she had a moment in the Citadel where she decided that this is what she was going to do. She also snorts chalk at one point, not that it's really important, but it also does happen, which I was really shocked by, because she gets like amazing high and she realizes that all she wants is peace, and all she doesn't care about anything else, and she just wants to go home and just be around the people she loves and like XYZ, right? So she says, you know, the guy asked her what was your purpose here, and she had said Grimes. Grimes shows up, and Grimes tries to convince her to stay in Hell, that they will have a better time here, where their bodies don't need food, their bodies don't need essence and stuff, and that she could die. Then eventually they'll make their way back, and she'll be the most brilliant magician in the entire world because she conquered Hell. She did not fall for this. She didn't want anything to do with this. She decided really early on that she knew that Grimes was going to pull some bullshit on her, and so she basically said, hey, this is what I was going to do to you, and you can't really do anything about it, though, to be honest with you. And then she starts drawing a pentagram, and it's not like a normal size pentagram, and he's like, what's going on, I don't understand, because she's like freaked out that he's going to do this thing, which is basically just bringing back the head as like a torture device, right, which we talked about, for her revenge. And instead she sacrifices Grimes' soul, which is stuck on this plane at the moment because the guy summoned him and brought back Peter, and they go up the stairs out of Hell together. And that was the ending of the book. I have such mixed opinions on Katabasis as a novel. I have such mixed thoughts on what I think R.F. Kuang was trying to achieve with this novel. Because here's the thing, most authors, I just had this whole conversation with, you know, every book has an intention behind it. If that's a simple intention of like, oh, I've never seen this written in this way, shape, or form. Or it could be a more complex intention, like I'm trying to teach you something. I want you to know there's a moral quandary here. I want you to figure it out as a reader. That was my intention. Everything else does not matter. And I feel like R. Kuang typically lays on more of that side of things, where there's a moral quandary at its forefront. If that's talking about something that she believes is still going on in this time, like Yellowface, if that's teaching you the racism in the world and making white people offended, like Babel. Not that I read that, but I'm pretty sure that's what that's about, right? And then we also have Hell, which in a way almost just seems like she's telling us, oh my god, I read all these things and now I have all this knowledge and I wanted to write a book about Hell. And there's a lot of other conversations going on here, such as assault in a school setting, particularly a high class setting. This is also set in like, it's a historical fantasy, and so there's elements of like, you know, no one believed her because she was a girl, and she's like one of the first few seasons allowed a female students allowed in here, and every other student's ever been in here has also said the same thing, and so they don't believe them. And there's a lot of other like deeper meaning meaning stuff going on, and I can see where there's points where I could see where she was kind of going with this. However, because the middle is so deranged, I guess, and I feel like at some point it does lose the plot pretty heavily, I just don't think it's a good follow through. I land on a 2.75. If this is your favorite book of all time, I'm very sorry. And that, my friends, is Katabasis. I will talk to you all next time for another video like this. Alright, thanks for watching, and goodbye.